My name is Carla Carlisle. I'm the executive director of the Compassionate Companion. My organization is focused on mental wellness and healing for youth, young adults, and families. I specifically am really committed to bringing families together in the healthiest of ways, and that's based on my background and experience as a former foster mother. I fostered my son for 6 months, and then he was given to his birth mother. I co-parented with her outside of the system for 6 years, and that was a really tough 6 years. When my son was 6, he had a mental health crisis that was really major, so I ended up with emergency custody. And by the time he was 8, I had adopted him. With his struggles and his trauma, as well as my own from that whole situation, I left my corporate job and decided to focus on this mental health and wellness and healing full time. And so now I work with families and youth across Mecklenburg County and beyond through workshops, through consulting, and a number of different things to really help with healing our community. A safe space to me means that a person is comfortable and competent and feels supported, that what they share will not be shared unless someone's life is at risk, and that they are really embraced for their experiences, for their difficulties, and accepted for who they really are. I think it's important in order to provide a safe space, we have to bring our authentic selves to the table. And so whenever I start off working with someone, I'm very open about my own personal struggles with mental health, with anxiety and depression. And I share that, this picture that you see, this presence you see, is not all there is to me. There's a lot of hurt and pain in there, but I've learned a lot of tools and techniques to help me, and I want to share those. And so I think we make a safe space by embracing the person and welcoming them for who they are, and then also bringing our true selves to the table. One last thing I'll add to that is that we have to listen. One of the things that makes the space safe is that we stop talking and we listen. And I think that is something that our youth oftentimes don't get. We try a lot as parents and as caregivers and leaders to bless our children with good information and insight. But what we don't realize sometimes is that they are the expert on their life experience. And we have to listen to what's important to them for them to actually feel heard. I think it's really difficult for adults to actively listen because for the most part, most of us weren't raised that way. If you think of things like be seen and not heard, what happens in this house stays in this house, the traditional way of growing up, particularly in Black and Brown communities, is that the child is seen and not heard. So we want to impart all this knowledge and we have all the answers, but without recognizing that first of all, without the input of the child, we're going to lack some buy-in, right? We're going to lack some buy-in, but also the experiences that our youth have today are very different than the experiences we had before the internet, before mobile phones that can do anything and everything, positive and negative. Before, we may have always had bullying, but it's taken it's gone to a whole different level now with all these different social media apps and opportunities, as well as there are no boundaries. Kids can get information from anywhere, true or false. So you take a young person who has been through a lot, and then they have someone who wants to give them attention and listen to them. They might listen even though that person might not have their best interest at heart. So I think it's really important as adults that we stop and pause and really hear them. Even if what they're saying may not initially make sense to us, keep listening. The question is, how can adults be okay with having uncomfortable conversations with their children or with the children they support? That's a great question because the answer is not simple. And I've had to learn, first of all, I've had to learn as a parent, there are certain conversations my son is not going to have with me. And so my responsibility in that case is to help identify one or more trusted adults that he can have those conversations with. Just because it's not cool to tell mom certain things, especially with a young man, and vice versa. It's not always going to be that comfortable. So I think it behooves me as a parent to ensure that he has other outlets for conversation. And then I would just also say, as a parent, you're going to have to get uncomfortable. Be uncomfortable, because that's also how we grow and learn. If we're still in the status quo all the time when we're the authorities on everything, well, we're not being the best parents we can be. If we already know everything going into it, then we're going to miss something. So I would say to other parents and caregivers, whether it be, I have a friend and colleague who has open forum nights with her kids. And there's no punishment. Everybody's going to be respectful, but they can say what they want to say. That may not work for every family. I did that in my house, and it was okay, but still information came out that I would not have otherwise known. And I was able to provide support no matter how uncomfortable it was for me. I'd rather be uncomfortable and have my children or my young adults healthy and feeling supported than just being comfortable all the time. Especially when you look at the suicide rates and how high they are with Black and brown children, how they've increased so much. I've had 2 children try to die by suicide that have been in my care. And talk about uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable, but guess what? They're still here. And they're here because what I could not provide them, because I had to take my cape off, right? What I cannot provide them, I know that someone else can. And so my role is to help them by finding the resources that can support them. And if I hear no the first time, I'm not accepting it. If I hear no the second time, I'm probably not accepting it, or I'm going to get a referral to someone else until I find the right fit for my child. And he or she will likely have input into that depending on the age. So social media and all these different social pressures really do impact our children now. First of all, it's something we didn't deal with. So we may have dealt with a bully at school, but we got to go home. Now a kid can come home and get bullied online. And oftentimes they don't share that with a parent. They may share it with a peer. So I am not one that says all social media is bad, because there are a lot of positive things that can go on and can be introduced through social media, through being online. But there has to be a balance. And so I will share this with you. My most recent book is called My Epic Flow, and I was asked by the county to do this book, and it's for young adults. And it's similar to my first book, My Big Notebook. It's an interactive workbook for young adults, because we've seen so many challenges with violence, domestic violence, youth suicide, all these different challenges that our kids are dealing with now. And I was honored to put this book together. But one of the things that I put in the book was, okay, I had all these topics and I thought, okay, the book is done, right? This book is done. But something inside of me was really nagging at me, saying I'm missing something. So Greg Jackson from Hill Charlotte had me come to one of his events for young children, young adults who had been impacted directly by violence, by gun violence. And so I did a workshop using my big notebook with them, but it was also a focus group. And so while I taught them these tools and techniques and gave them the books, I also listened and learned from them, and from their feedback, I added 18 pages to my book. They talked about fear, just fear in general, fear of the future, fear of, am I going to live? What's going to happen to me? What are my options? We talked about the impact of gun and community violence, because every single one of these 30 plus kids have been directly impacted by gun violence. That was unheard of. I hate to say it this way because I feel old, but back in my day, that was unheard of. We talked about relationships. We talked about boundaries with adults. We talked about boundaries in relationships. All of these things I added to my book because I had to listen. If I listen to them, I understand what they're facing. We talked about drugs. We talked about all these different things that existed back in the day, but it's multiplied and it's everywhere and it's surrounding them. So if we ignore these very important topics, we're missing the mark. I think it's important for young people to talk openly about mental health, first of all, because we really need to eliminate the stigma of mental health. And I've been really proud of the young adults that I've been working with because it's a part of their conversation. There's still some stigma around it, but you hear so many more youth talking about their therapist or having conversations about feeling depressed and feeling down. The less stigma, if we could eliminate stigma, we would be approaching mental health the same way we approach physical health. I've had conversations with adults, and I really want to share this because I think this is so important, because I've heard many adults say, well, if he just tried, or if she could just snap out of it. That's not how mental health works. So we have to get educated to be able to support not just ourselves, but our children as well. And so as young adults learn about mental health and they experience mental health challenges, then they're not ashamed to ask for help, because that's what we all need sometime. If I break my arm, I'm not embarrassed to go get my arm put in the cast. If I have a mental health challenge, and it's hard because it's not seen visually, maybe the behaviors show up, but it's not seen visually. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've had this conversation with parents, or even with myself, with my own child, to say, hold on. Yes, we're all responsible for our behaviors, but this is chemical. This is biological. This isn't a bad kid. This is a kid who's dealing with trauma, who's dealing with a mental health condition. Just like when I feel like I can't get out of the bed, why do I think it's easy for the next person to get out of bed sometimes? Sometimes that is the best we can do, is to get out of bed. So I think it's important that we recognize what our children are dealing with today, and also understand that, first of all, we have to take care of ourselves to be able to take care of our kids. But in addition to that, I think it's important that we take care of ourselves. And I think as we were growing up, that was looked upon as being selfish. But the truth of the matter is, when we are not healthy and we are not focused on healing, we are not the best parents to our children. So self-care is not selfish, and self-care isn't just about going to get a manicure and pedicure or a massage. There are other tools and techniques that we as adults can utilize to take care of ourselves. Some people it's working out, some people it's music, there's therapy, there are all different ways to do that, but we can model that for our children also. I have said to my son, honey, I need 10 minutes. I needed 10 minutes to breathe it out, to clear my mind, and to be able to refocus on whatever was going on. and I deserve that 10 minutes, and he deserves me after that 10 minutes. So I think teachers, parents, other adults, counselors, administrators, I think what we need to do to better support our youth and young adults is, as I mentioned, to listen. But when I say that, I think we provide safe spaces and forums that will allow the young adults, the children, to be able to speak their mind without feeling like they're going to deal with repercussions. To be able to bring up tough topics. I don't care if it could range from having an anonymous survey, because see, we're coming with solutions, right? That's what men in particular, and many of us women, I'm solution oriented. We come with a solution, but what is it we're solving? We don't necessarily have the solution. So I think that if we listen to our youth and we actively listen and we ask probing questions, so we make sure we're clear on what the messaging is, because their communication is different than ours. I don't care if it's from the slang they use to just how they process information, it's different. And so we have to really make sure we're clear on what it means. And I'll give you a quick example. I attended a conference and there was a panel of young adults. And they were each asked, what is it that you need from adults? And I would say out of 8 panelists, 6 of them said we need them to listen and not turn around and tell us how that relates to a story about them. And the very next person who got up, the very next adult who got up and went to the microphone did exactly what they said they didn't need. This individual started telling a story about herself. She ended up wrapping it around and coming back to the youth, but that is exactly what 4 to 6 of them said. I don't want that. I want you to focus on me and hear me. I get that you may have a cousin or an uncle or a little sister or something, but we're talking about me right now. We're talking about the experiences I'm having in high school or in college. And you may have gone to college 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or whatever, but my experience is different. So just listen to me and receive what I'm saying. And I think that's very important that we do that. And then we take notes, and we can take beautiful notes and we can wrap it up in a nice bow. But then what do we do with it? Do we just put it over here on this shelf? Yep, we heard you. That's great. Carry on. Keep living your life. Or do we circle back around and say, we heard you. Here are the things that we're thinking. What do you think about these as potential options to support you and your peers? We keep them engaged because, first of all, they have skin in the game. Second of all, they're a part of the solution. It's not happening to them, it's happening with them. I think the church plays a critical role in the mental well-being of our youth. I don't think that the church has to disconnect from the core beliefs of a particular church or of the Bible at all to support our youth. What I believe, and I'm happy to say that I've worked with several churches now that are really focused on mental health and well-being. They support youth and parents going into therapy. I think, again, it's about being open and authentic. I've heard pastors say, I have dealt with my own depression. Do you know how powerful that is for someone to sit in a church pew and hear their own pastor, who some people feel like, that person is, leaps and bounds above where I am spiritually, to say, you know what? I'm dealing with my own struggles right now. I have dealt with depression. I have anxiety. And here are some things that I've done. And some worked for me and some didn't. But it's okay for you to know, like, you're not alone in this. literally, you're not alone in this because we are all human. If 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people deal with a mental health condition at any given time, to sit and say to a young person, I've had this experience myself, or, my child is struggling right now. How are you? How are you doing? And it's okay if you're not okay. But what we want to do is move. We don't want to sit in that space. We don't want to sit in the space where you're not okay. We want to support you focusing on wellness and healing. Like I say, I'll give myself a day to be down and to be out and to take that mental break, because there are moments when it's hard to move. It's okay to be still sometime. But what's not okay is to stay in that space because you don't think anyone will support you. And so we can say the words, but our actions really, that's walking the talk. It's not just the words, it's the actions. So when I do workshops, for example, I will go in, even with elementary school age kids, when we talk about the connection of thoughts, feelings, and actions, that's the cognitive triangle, I will tell them, this morning, I did not feel confident. My thought was, I'm not going to give the best workshop I'm capable of giving because these 3 things didn't line up. How do I feel? I don't feel confident. I feel insecure about this. Then what are my actions? So I take a pause and I say, you know why you're here. You know these kids are counting on you and you know what to do. So that stuff is not important, but this that's in front of me, these children are, and I know what I'm doing. So my action is to give you the best workshop I can possibly give and to hear you throughout that process. And so I model myself that level of vulnerability, and it really resonates with kids because when we come to them as the experts in everything, let me tell you how many degrees I have, etc. And I have the master's degrees, but guess what? That did not prepare me for being a mom to my son. That did not prepare me for dealing with all the trauma that he experienced and that I have had to support him through and will continue to do that for the rest of his life and mine. There's a level of vulnerability that has to be there for you to be taken seriously by any young person. And if you think about it, that's the same in any business situation. If you come with all facts and figures and you have no connection to what you're doing, are you going to be the person selected, or is it going to be the person next to you with a story of why this is so important to them? That's a story that is real and that is true. So the Youth Mental Wellness Summit, which is on October 10th, 2024, I'm so excited about it. I really want attendees to come away with a few takeaways. For the youth, I know I sound like a broken record, but I want them to feel heard, and I want them to feel like they have a hand in solutioning. Every policy is not the right thing. Maybe we need to shake a few things up because it's not working. What I want adults to take away from the conference is that they had an opportunity that a lot of times we don't get, to have an audience and a panel of people who are committed to our youth and their mental wellness and healing, and to hear directly from the youth about what's important to them and how they might feel supported. They may not know it all, which I don't expect them to, but trust and believe that within what they share, there are going to be nuggets where we can learn from them. So it's a learning experience for everyone. It's an opportunity to share, but most importantly, it's an opportunity for us to gain insight and to really listen And there's something very powerful about walking away from a situation as a young person, feeling heard and valued. And I want everyone who attends to understand the value that they bring to the table, whether they're young or whether they're old. Everybody has some value to bring. And while we will obviously appreciate the differences that we bring, because that is important, right? If we all have the same opinion, there's nothing we're gaining out of it, right? But if we value those differences, but we also recognize there's some synergies there, we have some shared goals and some shared values, then we can conquer so much together. But we have to start off by laying that foundation. And I believe that this summit is a great opportunity to start laying that foundation, or even building on some of the work that Living Waters has already done in the community. But we have some new voices, so we can only make our foundation stronger. And that's what I believe will be the key takeaways from the summit.